You're listening to Bloomberg Businessweek with Massar and Tim Stenovec on Bloomberg Radio.
We've got some numbers for everybody to chew on. 93% of respondents said that they believe climate change poses a serious and imminent threat to the planet. 71% say the weather where they live has gotten more extreme over the past few years. We have certainly seen it this year. And 82% worry that climate change will make life extremely difficult and unpleasant for all of us and our families.
I can relate to a lot of this. Given, Carol, in my time in New York, I've lived through 3 once in a 100-year storms.
I know.
And that's like,
supposed to be anomalies, not so much.
3 once in a century storms.
Well, the figures we just talked about, right? I know it's dramatic, but we're living it. The figures come from Edelman's 2023 Trust Barometer special report, Trust in Climate Change, released this month. Richard Edelman is in the house. He's CEO of Edelman, the global public relations firm, of course, behind the Trust Barometer. We've talked about it over the years. He's just back from COP28, the UN's annual climate change conference, which this year is being held in the UAE, and it's just about halfway over at this point. As we said, he's here in studio. How are you? You are just back.
Yeah.
Feeling a little jet lagged?
A little bit, yeah. But I actually feel good about the progress at COP28, Carol, because the importance of the finance unlock cannot be understated.
What do you mean by that?
So, in a sense, to have a remediation fund that was passed the first day by the assembled multitude is a big deal. And also that UAE and Bloomberg Philanthropies announced a big fund, $30 billion to invest in climate technologies. That's making finance work for climate remediation.
How has that not happened in the past? Because I feel like in an ESG world, I think we thought all this money was coming in.
And it's called COP28, not COP1.
But the other 27 haven't come to these kinds of agreements. And so the $500 million already voted for remediation funds. They need a lot more. And also, let's face it, the reality of fusion and hydrogen and all these things that need actually to be invested in and made available at a right price. And it's the key thing that binds the North and the South together. Think that before you always had this kind of, well, you Western guys have already had yours, and now we want ours. And so the remediation fund, so for example, Lula of Brazil got up and said, listen, give me remediation so I can stop people cutting the forest in Amazon. Makes sense. We have to pay farmers not to do that.
Right.
And so this remediation kind of thing, or the venture fund, is part of, we hear you, South, we want to be helpful to you. As opposed to the opposing.
In terms of technology, in terms of solutions, what moves the needle here?
I think optimism. And so our study, the Trust study on sustainability, showed that people who believe that the climate change can be dealt with will change their behavior.
I was so interested in these numbers. They were so much higher than I thought. And I thought to myself, go do this in Congress and see what members of Congress actually believe.
But a person who is optimistic is 2.5 times more likely to change his behavior about shorter showers or EVs or whatever else, as opposed to the half of the world that says, I give up. It's too late. What the hell? I may as well, drive a gas guzzler.
But is somebody who's coming out of an emerging economy, maybe they're the first generation to actually have running water and electricity, do they care how that electricity is generated? To the same extent that my neighbors who say after the storm here in New York on September 29th, they say, you know what? We're going to pay $30,000 for solar because we think it's a good investment and we need to do something.
And we need to say, look, I think in the developing world, it's about the price because it's a price and access. And if I don't have the ability to have a light so that my kid can read and get educated, then I want the light. And I should feel like I should get it. But as to where it comes from, meaning whether it's oil or solar, they don't care. But it has to be affordable. And that's the key point of this. But I think another key point in this study is the relatively low trust in business. We've always talked about how business is much more trusted than government, not on sustainability, because we're seen as having talked a lot and delivered a little. And so I really like that so many companies showed up to COP28. And it's in agriculture, or it's in energy, or it's in tech.
I feel like it's starting to ESG, right? The original idea, right, was that these ESG elements would affect your business. And I feel like climate is now affecting people's business. In other words, whether either shuts it down or, I think about the beer producers or, we talk to a lot of folks in the wine industry, the fires, the, soil's changing, it's dry or whatever. But I think in general, companies are really being hit and impacted by it. And so they've got to do something.
Well, and
is that fair?
It is totally fair, Carol. They want to be part of change because their supply chains are deeply disrupted otherwise. And so why regenerative agriculture for Unilever? Because they're going to make the soybeans that go into the mayonnaise, that, and they're going to have to do it in a way that the soil is able to keep producing.
Yeah.
And I heard something fascinating in COP. 50% of the farmers who own cattle are 65 plus or something. There's a whole generation change, and it's 50% of all farms are people who are 50 plus.
It makes sense.
And so the youngers,
they want to move to the city. They don't want to be doing.
Correct, but we have to get younger farmers. So there's a generation change possible who will want to do
it differently.
A different approach.
Well, we always talk about, consumers, they care. Like we've had conversations, my daughter, but is it true? Is that really moving the nut? That is somebody going to say, I'm going to buy this because that company stands for what I believe in, but it's going to cost me double the price or a third more. Will we do that?
Consumers won't pay more.
Yeah.
And they told us, we did a study with NYU over the summer, and if it's good for me and good for the planet, I'll do it.
I run into this all the time. Like, I think it's FedEx or UPS or like even, buy tickets for an airline and they're like, do you want to pay a few more dollars to offset? I'm like, no, like, why is that? I've done it
with Uber. I've done it with drives, like go for a green car,
Yeah. But oftentimes that's like less expensive.
Yeah.
When we were on the West Coast and every car was like that.
Yeah, that's true. It was easy on the West
Yeah.
Coast.
That's so interesting to hear.
But a company like Hyundai that has $50,000 EV is going to sell more than ones that are for 80 or 90 or 100.
That's true.
But because in a pyramid in the marketing business, we've got to get to the big middle.
Yeah.
And those are the people who want to be incentivized.
We talk about it, right? We'd love to own EVs.
Yeah, we live in a city where we can't even get parking.
It's tough. Hard.
Yeah, it's tough. But
the price points have been.
But look at over the last 6 months, the way EV sales in the U.S. have fallen off a cliff essentially. And in favor of internal combustion engines. I mean, if you'd asked me a year ago,
or
hybrids are doing well, but they're still use gas.
Well, EV sales passed 1 million units this year out of 17 million, and again, the producers are anticipating it's going to be a quarter of the market in the 2 or 3 years, but they're going to have infrastructure such that it makes it easy for you to refill.
Is the U.S. and China doing enough? They're important in all of this, the biggest emitters, right, when it comes to the impact.
So the Chinese continue to do coal plants,
right?
And yet they're also the biggest implementers of solar because their energy use is continuing to soar. So the hope is that the COP28 will stimulate them to focus more on the solar than the coal, because the coal is cheap. And again, it's a price issue for developing markets. But if consumers start to, and this is where I think COP has to go to a next step in COP29 or 30 and actually say to consumers, we want you to affirmatively change your behavior and buy products that are sustainably sourced.
Yeah. The onus is on all of us too, right?
Correct. Shorter showers, cold water wash. There are all sorts of small things that we need to do. But it's really interesting, Carol, that
just quickly,
the source of information has to be scientists, but also people like you. Somebody who's a friend and family. We've got to get to the pastor or other people, informal sources, because they don't just believe experts anymore. Yeah.
That's really interesting. Your community, right? Like has to be kind of putting pressure on you.
Yep.
Be well. So good to see you in studio. Happy holidays.
Thank you so much. Happy holidays.
Richard Edelman, of course, CEO of Edelman, joining us in studio.